every day there are, millions of bees that we don't even know about, being shipped from Italy to, North Dakota, or from Hawaii to Canada.
Welcome to the GOAT Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Cassinan. At GOAT, we define sustainability through the lens of intentionality, circularity, and community. With this framework, any problem can be solved. The stories that we share, the pioneers that we talk to, show us a different way to build the future we all want to have.
We're at a pivotal moment where nuclear is needed more than ever. Let's once and for all become a circular economy.
Waste is not cost neutral. Like, it always costs your business something. So if you can get rid of that, then that's good for business as well.
There's this dissonance. We talk a really good game about protecting the ocean, but the purchase decisions that we make don't match with our espoused values.
An ideal food system revolves around relationship. Where is my food coming from? Who's growing it? How is it being grown? And why does that matter?
Thanks for being here. Let's dive into the conversation. What kind of got you fascinated in bees from the first place?
Well, actually, I had no background in bees other than where I grew up in Germany, in a small town in a wine growing area, and just maybe a couple of hundred yards behind the house, going into the forest, there was this area where there was always a buzzing, there was always beehives, and bees were just always part of growing up in a smaller city, growing up in the countryside. They were always there, but other than that, I didn't have um, a connection with bees at all. But I stumbled. I'm a scientist by background, but completely different animals that I worked with in my career. But I stumbled across this technology, this idea for a bee vaccine by complete accident. It was not supposed to happen, at the University of Helsinki in 2018, where the university had brought me in to look at some of their technology portfolios, advances in science, different labs, and all in a life science space, to see if there's potentially a company that could be formed around, or a partnership that I could arrange with an existing company to further develop these technologies. And by accident, the professor who came up with the idea for a bee vaccine was in the office, and I was not supposed to meet with her, but the Daya Freitag, and the director saw her and called her into the room and said, "Daya, you need to tell this visitor what you are working on, this idea for a honeybee vaccine." And she didn't have a presentation. She just told me her story and the idea, and I was like, wait a minute, we know how extremely important these animals are for our survival on so many levels. For years, we've been talking about the collapse of honeybees, dying of honeybees globally, and we're throwing our hands up and nobody really knows what to do about it. And here is somebody that has an idea, and we know that vaccines work. We know that they are extremely effective in preventing the spread of diseases. Yes, this is a bee and not a dog or cat or human, but still, why isn't anybody doing this? And so I sat down with her, I looked at the data that she had generated, and we got along really well. And we said, you know what? Why don't we just do this? Why don't we just try this? Let's get together. And that's how it happened. And then I learned a lot about honeybees in the last couple of years, just reading up and meeting with people, and getting educated around.
So, what fascinates you about science in general? I mean, I'm always fascinated with learning how somebody focuses on a specific area, but I mean, I would imagine you could have pretty much done anything in the world. Why science?
Well, I just find it amazing that, it's a mystery. It's a mystery that you have, which brings me back to the honeybee. I mean, biodiversity. I mean, look at the amount of different plants and animals and flowers. It sounds, obvious, but at the same time, they all are made out of the same fundamental basic um, substance. You have DNA, and you have, they form cells, and then they live and they breathe, and despite the fact that they are all, have the same starting point, it's just amazing what on this world, what became our environment, and what we live in, and I was just always fascinated by it, by every single aspect of it. How does this work? How does it hold together? And we need to protect it. And here I had an opportunity to say, I can do something. I can do something very real that will or could potentially have a huge impact on generations to come. That it doesn't happen every day. It doesn't, and then I called my husband in the middle of the night from Helsinki and said, "You know what just happened? I just need to do this. We need to do this." And he was thankfully extremely supportive.
Well, and what is that moment like? Because I almost equate it to that, jumping off the cliff moment of like, you have this urge that you have to do something. You suddenly can't sleep. You're it's compelling. Um, what was that like to actually just know that you had to make that shift?
That's a really, really good question. I mean, I was fascinated in the beginning of the opportunity and the signs, and the more and more I was diving into it, learning more about it, and learning about the impact of not just honeybees, pollinators, insects in this world. I mean, we think of insects as something that we have to get rid of, and it's a nuisance. But no, it's like it's really, really important for us to protect them. And the more I got fascinated, and I spent probably 6 months trying to find an experienced entrepreneur to take on this project. Um, there are plenty of serial entrepreneurs that start companies, but um, it was just not going to happen. There are many, many opportunities out there that an entrepreneur can take and form a company and can make money with it. But if you have something like this that is is impacting our lives on a much greater, much more long lasting level, that is not another app, that is not short term revenue, but where we don't really know what we are embarking at. It needs that passion, and it needs that moment that has to come, and it came to me. And the thing is, if you have a startup where you do something completely novel that nobody has ever done before, there was no regulatory pass, there was no, nothing, the manufacturing, we're creating this entire novel field of animal health and sustainability. And you there are so many moments where things can go wrong, or that you didn't expect, and hurdles that you have to climb. If you don't have that spark in you, you can't do it. And now that you're asking me, because you can probably tell it's still here.
I don't think it ever leaves, to be honest. Like once you realize you've gone through it, it's like it's always there.
It's always there. Yeah, and it drives you forward. And it's just, we really, and it only gets bigger because, when we look at what's happening in the weather, when we look at, droughts, when we look at um, floods that are where there shouldn't be a flood, if we look at fires in areas where there shouldn't be fires, things are just are just really out of whack, and and we need to act now, and we need to really pay attention to these things and to these events, how they impact us and how they impact us in the long run. And insects are a critical part of this equation. We need we need nature, and we're not going to have plants if we don't have pollinators, if we don't have insects helping us sustain. And we have to shift the way we think about these crucial animals and protect them. And and we don't have tools, or until now. I mean, we came about, Dalan's mission is to really change that on a global, on a big, this is a global, this is not a local issue. These are not local issues that we're dealing with, whether it's the direct impact of pollinators on our food security. They are a critical link. I mean, it's, if you don't have pollination, we lose at a minimum one third of the food we eat. And these are, mostly nutrition rich, vitamin rich foods, fruits and vegetables that are, we cannot rely on just a few pollinators flying around and making sure that, we're too many people on this planet. We have to have, um, a way to increase yields, but we have to do this in a sustainable way. And using honeybees is probably the most sustainable that you can, you put, you even for wind pollinating plants. I mean, you can take soy, and you don't need honeybees. You don't need pollination. The wind will do it. But if you put a beehive into a field, you can double the yield easily. And you've nothing done but put a beehive into the field. I mean, it's remarkable. You don't need fertilizers. I mean, yes, fertilizers are important, but you don't have to do magic. The bees will do it for you, and they have to be, or they are a part of the equation, but we need to protect them.
Devil's advocate here. I mean, of course, with science, technology, engineering, you could be like, well, let's just synthesize what a bee can do, and then we'll take care of it. It's okay about the bees. Obviously, we know that's probably not the way to go forward. But what is what is so unique about bees? What's so special about the bee? Because I don't think a lot of people really understand, besides the fact, like, ooh, don't sting me. Ah, they get up and run around the table a few times. Like, I feel like there's just such this misconception around bees, and specifically honeybees. What is it about them?
Well, so there are, the thousands of different species of bees that are wild bees and are wild pollinators. And then there is the commercially used bee, which is the honeybee. And they're commercially used for, for at least 3,000 years that we know about it, that people have put them into, tree trunks, and they can carry them around, and you can put them where you need them, either for honey production or for wax for candles, or the honey in, or for skin grafts in medicine for burn victims. So there's you have more than the honey. And then I mean, of course, honey also in medicine, very important, in addition to the food industry that needs it, um, for the cereal, and all these wonderful things, so in your tea. But in addition, the pollination is extremely important. So if you so the cycle of a the yearly cycle of a beekeeper, that in the U.S. it starts with the almond pollination in California early in the year. Millions of beehives that are put on semi trucks, and they come into this $5 billion industry of almonds. Wouldn't exist if it wasn't for these 2.5 million hives that come into the country. I mean, into the state every year. I mean, it's massive. Yeah, we think, we don't it's an incredible industry that, is just flying under the radar and is so important for us. But and of course it's a trickle down effect. You don't have the almonds, it's labor that's attached to this. It's shipping industry. 80% of the world's almonds come from California, meaning they are brought down to Long Beach or wherever, put on ships. I mean, it's a global, chain of events that starts with the honeybee, with how these bees nothing. But then they're put back after the almond pollination, put back onto the semi trucks and go up to Washington. Apples. You have the whole Eastern Washington that needs, and there are pumpkins and onions and so they these hives travel the country over to Maine for blueberries down to and then at some point when they are done with the pollination, they start making honey for over the summer. And then they hibernate and then the cycle starts again with the almonds in the spring. So they're extremely they are workhorses and they work for us and they endlessly work for us. And there were these wonderful attempts. I mean, scientists can come up with all kinds of things. Well, if the honeybee disappears, how about we build little robots, little drone, robots, honeybee robots, which great idea. Love science. But if you've ever looked at a honeybee climbing into a flower, whether it's a cactus flower, whether it's an apple blossom, whether they look entirely different. They they're constructed differently. And the bee is able to visit them all and to pollinate them all. A drone, a little robot, is never going to be that flexible. You would have to have an almond pollinating, drone, and you have to have an apple pollinating drone, and so on and so forth. So I think, it's an interesting exercise, but it's not going to replace the honeybee, and it's not going to and we can't if you have a big plantation, which is important for us today, the way we live in big cities, and we have to rely on agriculture bringing food to us. A wild bee would probably say, I'm not going to eat almonds, pollen for the next 2 weeks and, stay here in this plantation. They're just not going to. You need to put the honeybees in that says, okay, I'm going to be here for the next 2 weeks and do my job. A wild bee wouldn't, they wouldn't be as effective in really pollinating these large areas that are often monocultures that have to be pollinated.
Wow. I mean, just thinking about how they're like the busiest on the road workers ever. Like it's so funny. Like I've driven up and down the coast of California, and I think once you start to recognize white boxes, then you see them everywhere. I think it's one of those things where somebody says a type of car, and then suddenly you see that car everywhere. It's very much like that when you're like, oh, honeybees, and they're like, oh, they're everywhere. Um, to think though that the entire industry it starts with that, like that. Why are they always so vilified? I think that, like, I mean, honeybees on one side, it's like, oh, yes, protect them. But then when you have a bunch of honeybees kind of around, most people are like, oh, we have so many bees, let's get rid of them. Did something happen when, like, they kind of just, everybody just kind of turned against them?
I don't know. I think for the most part, um, we're recognizing globally how important they are. I do think that there was this time, from like when I grew up, they were always there and there, and you run, across the lawn both barefoot, and of course you're gonna get stung. I mean, it's just like You grow up not in a big city, that's what's gonna happen, and it's part of, growing up. And then there was this time where, you're allergic to bee stings and, it's a bad thing, and you get in the press, negative. But then I think that has shifted. I think what I'm hearing, people are very much, and what the company has experienced. I mean, we were a small company of 5 people that tried to do something very different, but we didn't advertise, we didn't tell, we just got to work and develop this vaccine, worked with the regulator, say, okay, this is an animal vaccine, it has to be regulated the same way than you would for, a dog or a cat. We want this to undergo the same rigorous testing for efficacy and safety and purity and identity, just like any other vaccine. We want to change the way we think about these animals that are working for us every single day, and they don't get the same care that we give any other animal. And this has to change. And this can only change if we give it the importance and the dedication that we would give to any other animal. And but we did it, in our small world, and without much fuss. And then we put this press release out that we got the conditional license from the USDA for the world's first honeybee vaccine. And all of a sudden, we got this global attention from from people wanting to know, who is this company? What did they do? Why is there a vaccine? We can do something, and I think, for us, that was a sign that we touched a nerve in people around the world, that they care about the honeybee, and they care about the environment, and they care about that we can do something, that we don't have to wait for policy changes that take 20 years, but we can do something. Each one of us can do something and contribute something to make sure we save and protect these animals that are so critical. So I think we are in this new phase where we realize, unless we find better. I mean, right now, the way so honeybees are, of course, threatened not just by diseases. Diseases are probably responsible for half of the losses that are, so it's an important part. But then, you have predators, you have weather, hurricanes, fires. So it's a pesticides. It is definitely multifactorial, but with the diseases, we can actually tackle a very important part of this equation, and make a change.
So how do you go about I mean, how do you go about developing something to help the honeybees? Like I'd say like that's like one, how do you identify the disease itself? But two, then how do you go to start treating it? What was that process like? Because obviously when you mentioned before, you're going into completely uncharted territory. So it's like you just stare at the blank wall and you're like, "Huh, where do I start?"
Pretty much. That's that's what well, there were, we have vaccines for other animals, or for humans. So we know, um there is a framework out there somehow, where these traditional vaccines, so like the polio vaccine, or whatever we got as children, it's a dead bug, basically. It's the dead pathogen that you are exposed to in a very, controlled way, and develop an immunity, and there are frameworks for those developments. So we said, okay, well, we know these diseases, whether they are bacterial diseases or fungal diseases or viral diseases, just like, we can get the flu or we can, get pneumonia. Same here. Um, they are all what's called notifiable diseases. They're worldwide classified as notifiable diseases. That means if you get a disease, you're supposed to tell the authorities that you have it. Because the regulators or governments realize how important these animals are. And if you get the disease, they want to make sure that the diseases don't spread. And for this disease that our first vaccine is against a disease called American foul brood. And despite its name, it's a global pandemic. These are traded globally. They're shipped in little cages around the world with the postal service. Every day there are, millions of bees that we don't even know about, uh, um, being shipped from Italy to, North Dakota, or from Hawaii to Canada. And so there's a global, and, we've all seen what happens if you don't have a means to lower the risk of getting sick. You carry these diseases with you. So American foul brood, which is a bacterial disease, exists in about 50% of hives around the world. Australia, New Zealand, Spain, India, US, Canada. It doesn't matter where you look, there it's there. And so we went out and you know collected a strain from a sick hive. And so typically, just to step back a little bit, because there is nothing other than beekeepers for many, many years in many countries would use prophylactically antibiotics. They would pour antibiotics over the hives to bring the bacteria burden down because they were so afraid of these diseases. Antibiotics obviously is not a good idea in beehives because antibiotic resistance, it ends up in the honey, we eat it, and it's not good. So in 2017, the USDA said no more antibiotics in livestock, also honeybees. But if you don't have anything else, it's a hard choice to make to not use antibiotics anymore. And if you do have a case of American foul brood, so if the bacteria which is in your hive all of a sudden decides to cause the disease, so you have clinical symptoms, and you see the clinical symptoms, you're supposed to pour gasoline over your hive, all equipment that came in touch with this hive, and burn everything to the ground, and then bury it, dig a ditch and bury it. Because these diseases are so contagious, and you have to remember they're wild animals. So the bee might carry it and just fly out for several miles and deposit it on a petal of a flower. Next bee comes, carries it home. So in addition to this, to the burning of the sick hive, all the hives that were in a radius of several miles that are at risk because these bees fly around have to be quarantined. So they're taken out of production and observed for several weeks. The flowers don't wait. They will bloom and they need the pollination. If you're a beekeeper and your hives are now quarantined, we've all learned that this is very expensive. If you isolate, it's very effective to limit the spread of a disease, but it's also very, very costly on the beekeeper, on the grower that doesn't get the pollination, on everybody else. So that's one of the motivations why we chose American foul brood, because here you really have to burn. You're obligated to burn your hives and you're obligated to quarantine. So it's worldwide the most costly, detrimental disease to beekeepers. And so we took the bacteria, we grow it up, we inactivate it so it can't cause disease anymore, and then we feed it to the queen bee. And we put it in a sugar paste. And actually, the way it works, the queens don't like to eat themselves. They like to be fed. They like to be fed royal jelly. So the work of the attendants that are with the queen will take up the sugar paste that has the vaccine and digest it and put it into royal jelly. They make royal jelly out of it that now has the vaccine in it. And now they feed it to the queen. The queen takes this royal jelly that now contains the vaccine, takes it up, digests it, and transports pieces of it into the ovary, into her ovaries. So every larvae, every egg that now develops sees the actual vaccine and will start mounting an immune response before they hatch. So before they come out of the egg, they was like, "What disease out there? I can't get sick." So because these diseases are so contagious and controlled across the world, we obviously can't infect hives in the wild to test efficacy. So we do all of this in the lab. We vaccinate the queen, we put her into the hive, she establishes a new colony, and then we take larvae, 1-day-old larvae, they're tiny, tiny, they just hatched. We take them back into the lab and we expose them to high doses of the disease. And if they don't get sick, your vaccine works. And so that's what we had to demonstrate and work closely with the USDA to show how when you work with bees, they're not, cows or pigs or chickens. How would the clinical trial look? What would have to be different? How is the data to be interpreted to show safety and efficacy? But that's basically in a very short summary. What-
What was the moment? What was the moment like when it worked? Like like can you walk me through that moment where you realized it worked?
Well, we knew from the initial data that it should be the data that was done in the lab that this should be possible. And now we had to do it in a rigorous company setting, reproducible, just knowing, everything was with a protocol, very, very rigorous, very, very standardized. And in the middle, as we all know, so I was in Los Angeles, my co-founders were in Austria, Graz. We were a virtual company, we were everywhere. And there was no CRO in the world that could do a bee vaccine trial. It doesn't exist. So we had to teach people, we had to teach these service provider that carry out animal clinical trials how to do this. And of course, the pandemic hit. And it was, you can't do trials like this virtually. It just doesn't, it was disruptive on so many levels. So um when we learned that it worked, when we finally were able to pull this all together, moving everything around, finding people that could travel, that could get it done. Um, and we were all on Zoom, obviously, when the data came in, and it was all blinded, so nobody knew which hive was vaccinated, which hive wasn't vaccinated, and we unblinded it, and it was just like, wow, wow, we did it. We did it. But then we had to go to the regulator and, of course, say, look, this is what we have. We really feel that this is proof that we can go out and can provide a novel tool to beekeepers. And this is only the beginning. I mean, we're working on other vaccines now for other diseases, but we were able to show it's possible. It's not just possible, it's necessary and it's critical.
That's incredible. I mean, just it's that thing where you set out to do something and then one, it works, which is amazing because science is very much about, you set the hypothesis and then you just hope it works. Um but the fact that it did, one, incredible, but two, like now, I mean, I didn't know about the whole, I mean, you literally have to burn everything. Like it's one, which is wildly wasteful, but two, like wildly destructive too. And not to mention super costly for the beekeeper. Like there's yes, there's of course the animal health side to it, and there's the crop side of it, but there's also the well-being of the people who are operating farms and growing food, and like that's a whole other side.
Yeah, I mean, beekeepers will tell you it's very traumatic. It's they're animals. They live with them. They depend on them. They care for them deeply, and you have no other choice but to do this. And it's cost because you have to burn everything that came in touch with your equipment, your bee suit, everything has to be burned. It's yeah, it's terrible when it happens.
Why isn't it more well known? I mean, just the idea. So like a lot of people are like, save the bees, wonderful, but like there's no understanding around the other side of all of it. Is it just because it's never been talked about, or is it not wanting to be talked about because it's a bigger problem than it is? Like, because to me, like when I hear that, I'm like, well, of course we have to do something. Like it's like a very simple decision at that point. It's not even complex in any way, shape, or form.
No, I think we've been taking it for granted. We've been taking this entire industry for granted. I mean, and I've seen it change over the last 5 years that we have this company now. We just turned 5 on December 19th. Yay! Yes.
Congrats.
But I remember in 2019 when I went to the first aquaculture conferences to make contacts with investors and also animal health company conferences. But mostly, what surprised me were the aquaculture conferences. Honeybees were not a topic. It was about, novel, tree species with, microbiome of, the roots or, different fertilizers. But the honeybee, which is so critical, was not part of the discussion, not part of innovation, or not part of a concern. And it struck me. It was, yes, they're in the news and we have to do something, but it didn't the industries didn't come together. It wasn't, and it's very, yeah, it's very striking. And that was also, or is, part of our mission. We have to change this. These animals deserve the same care and the same attention than any other livestock that is so critical that we depend on.
Wow. Well, and I kind of see it as part of, you could call it any industry in general, but more specifically, when you start looking at either sustainability or food or most of these industries right now that, you could argue that are very popular to be involved in, one topic ends up taking the whole thing. Like right now, everything obviously is centered around carbon. And yes, while it's important, it's very much one piece of a super, super complex system. And it's like everybody ignores the whole other part of it. And, that's part of our approach at GOAT is there's this idea of like, you have to approach things holistically. I mean, this, and taking a note from what you said earlier, like nature is complex. It's a wildly symbiotic system that it's not just input output in any way, shape, or form across the board. And the way the ecosystems actually rely on each other globally, not even just in the smallest ecosystem that we can fathom ourselves, it takes a holistic mindset. I mean, how do you start to shift that? I guess from like, is it just education? Is it showing it? Like, how do you shift that narrative? Because I mean, clearly it seems like, especially in the food system side of things, like it needs a more holistic view than just the microbiome root of a specific tree.
Right, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. Today, when we think about climate or sustainability, it still is very narrow. It's mostly, like you said, it's like lowering carbon by having more electric cars or using, wind. It's very tech driven and not, biotech driven, like what we do. It is not looking at nature holistically. It's much more narrow. And um, when we set out um, to find money for this endeavor, there was none because we were not animal health, because animal health is, companion animals and livestock. We were not food tech because food tech is everything, with the fruit and later, but not how the food comes about. And we were not aquaculture because aquaculture are the drones. It's the microbiome of the fruit. It's the plant. It's not, again, the animal that makes the plant be the plant. and so we were in this, no, I mean, the idea that we were embarking into on this journey into a completely new space from a regulatory side or science side. We didn't really anticipate that we were also doing this in from a money perspective of opening up this new space of investors that would go into sustainability, would go into biotech, that supported climate or biodiversity. That it was completely new, and it took a while to find right investors that were willing to take this leap, because it's a more long term investment. It's much riskier. It's most of these endeavors are typically, non-governmental organizations or government funding, but to show that you can actually become a company that can contribute to society and make money with it, rather than be an investable vehicle, rather than a nonprofit, is very new. So for us, I want to get this message across, not just that we can do something, that we can have impact, and we have to look at this more holistically, and but also that these are we need investors to come in if we really want to make a difference. We cannot rely on governments, and we cannot rely on non-governmental organizations to fund these endeavors, but we have to as a society, and it's possible. It's feasible.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, n- struck a chord on the finance side. I think that it's difficult. I mean, even just us as a media company, like we're taking on media in a way that's not, it's not looking for the 3-4 year return. It's not trying to pop on the hottest story. It's what is the thing that's actually longevity for the planet that's better. And I think when we start to look at time, we look at it through this like tiny window. We're like, oh, what's the next 5 years and how much money can we make? The planet doesn't work on that timeline. In fact, time is, we made it up. It's it's this long system. And I think that specifically when it comes to finance, I haven't been able to really understand why it's all focused on, the 5 year return. Um, sure, there's investor pressure, but like what you're working on actually is is foundationally good and needed. And when you look at a longer term plan of that, it is profitable. That's the thing. Like, I think a lot of people forget that, your Nikes, your Apples, your all those companies, they operated for a very long time before now they're this behemoth that makes a lot of money in X, Y, and Z. And I don't think a lot of people have the patience for that. And or maybe it's because they forgot it. But what was it like to navigate that? Because I think finances, I mean, you hit it. Finance is the lever that we need to pull because otherwise things don't actually go into motion. You have all these incredible ideas and solutions and people working on things, but in order to work on it, they need the financial side to continue to do it. How did you navigate that? Because I mean, you were literally in no man's land.
Right. So again, the honeybee is for many people a very important topic. And we relied in the early years heavily on angel investors. They made this possible. And they are individuals that have made money in their lifetime, still making money, and they want to do good. It's not the primary driver is not return on investment. It's an important driver. Absolutely. They're not giving to a charity, they're giving this to a company with the assumption that this company is going to generate a return. But they are also motivated by the bigger vision that we have of changing this world, of helping save this world, of helping push the boundaries of what's possible to address some of these big topics that we are dealing with. And if we don't do it now, like I said earlier, we don't have 20 years to wait with any of these topics. It's too late. And so angel investors are incredibly critical to make this possible when it comes to these kind of topics that we are dealing with. But it wasn't until I realized where we fit wasn't the traditional animal health and agriculture. It was climate. It was climate investors that, for the most part, will look at space. They will look at, because this world becomes inhabitable, we need to be able to go somewhere else. And and they already know that this is a big problem. And here I spoke to them and I said, well, in the interim, why why we plan for space. Maybe we can do something now. Maybe we can make this. And there was an article the other day in the New York Times about even if we go to Mars, we'll need insects because it's they're critical. And I think there is a growing investor community out there that is taking climate, sustainability, biodiversity serious, and that's where we fit. Even as a bio, so we're unusual because we're a biotech company, and these investors, for the most part, will invest in tech because that's traditionally, but they are open to these new solutions and recognize that we are part of the equation. Like you said, we can't be narrow. We have to, if we want to tackle this, we have to allow everything into this new field of investment. But I think there have to be more vehicles, and we have, even if we think about space, we can't have 5-year return. If you build a refueling station in space, it's not going to be ready in 5 years. It take a little bit longer. So these new funds, I think, and obviously the limited partners that are putting money into these funds understand that we're now dealing with global issues that need different horizons, also from an investment perspective.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that's so important when you start to look at it that way. I mean, you could take the classic case of Warren Buffett. He made all of his money after, 65 years of investing. Um, it shows that the long-term mindset actually can pay off. And I think that that shift is so important because especially when you look at climate investments, all of this is about patience. I mean, we call it a patient urgency. It's knowing that there's an urgency, but be a little patient about it, because it does take time, especially to do the right thing. I mean, in order to find out if something works at scale, also, I mean, it's about time, because a lot of solutions, and you guys understand this, a lot of solutions are wonderful in a lab. What does it look like at scale? That transition moment is actually arguably more important than the thing itself, because that's where you can see if it has a true benefit, where the hard parts are and the challenges that you need to overcome and continue to innovate it. I mean, what is what's the next step for, is it more disease, is it scalability of it, is it education, is it everything all at once and you just go, well, it's Tuesday, let's go this direction?
No, it's everything. It's everything at once. A big focus. You just, I mean, it rings. With what we're doing. If you do something so novel, it's one thing, as you said, in the lab, and you do, a few experiments and it works, and you write up your paper and it's fantastic. But now you have to transition it into a reproducible product at the same standard, everything that where you tell customer this is what it's going to do, and you stand behind it with everything, every possible part of your company is going to back this up, and that scaling is you can't just scale it up. If you're in a new space, you have to listen, you have to learn every single day. There has never been a vaccine for honeybees. If you are a beekeeper, if I don't know if you have pets, but if you do, likely if your pet gets sick, you go to the vet and the vet says, "Here, do XYZ." And you trust that important person that you came to for help. For the beekeeper, there is no veterinarian. We are offering a vaccine and they have to make the decision themselves of whether or not this is the best care for to protect to protect their investment, to protect their companion animal, to protect their workhorse, whatever level of if you're a single hive hobby beekeeper or a large commercial, and that requires trust, and it requires trust in us, and it means that we have to go out and we have to listen to beekeepers, we have to be out in the field. We can't just sit in our lab and do these products and then send them out the door and hope that it's going to have impact in the world. It is only going to have impact if we work together with the beekeeper to provide a product that they can actually use, that meets their needs, and not everybody will need this product, but it means constant learning, it means daily learning. And one of the very important parts of Dalan and everybody in this company is the knowledge that nobody has ever done this before. Nobody can have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers, period. And we all need to go out, we all need to go, whether it's the state veterinarian, whether it's the apiary inspector, whether it's a regulator, um, at the USDA, whether it's the beekeeper. Sit down with them, learn from them, listen to them, find out what their questions are, and answer them, and find the best way forward. And that takes time. And that this is not, if you want to, for us, we want to have a positive impact, and we're not going to have that in a vacuum. We're only going to have that together. Yes, so there will be more diseases that we want to tackle, and as I said, they're global diseases, and we get calls from around the world, from beekeepers and from regulators when can we, are you coming to our country? And I say, well, we're still a tiny company. We'll do our best, what we can. But we know there is a global need, and but 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 most importantly is this listening and learning. And if we want to get this right, we get it right together with everyone in this. You have to y- y- you have to understand that these vaccines, they're state veterinarians, right? That make decisions whether or not this vaccine can be, it gets market. It has market authorization in the U.S. from the USDA, but now every state veterinarian can make the decision whether or not the vaccine can be brought into their state. State veterinarians typically deal with cows and chickens and the typical livestock horses, that come into the state. Very often, they have not. There are a lot of state veterinarians. They are beekeepers, but for the most part, it's a new topic. A vaccine for honeybees. What is this about? So we have to make sure that everybody that should talk to each other talks to each other. Everybody that should, meet each other has to meet each other. And that's a big part of what we do is listen and share what we know and answer questions.
What's your favorite part of the process? Like now that you come from a science background, you build a company, you learn finance and fundraising, marketing, product testing. I mean, did you ever think you'd be in this position? And then what is your favorite part of it?
No, I'd never thought, this wasn't on the horizon for me. But I think it's this trying to tackle this new field, trying to solve these problems. And that's probably me as a scientist, that I say there is an issue. We have to understand first. We have to understand what the issue is before we can try to find possible solutions. But to tease that out, to tackle that, to find what is even going on here. I think that's fundamentally what I really and then bring the team together and say we can do this.
Where's your favorite place to enjoy nature? Whole planet.
Oh my goodness. That's a really difficult one. I would have to say um I would have to say Botswana or the Serengeti in Tanzania, just to see the animals are just amazing. To see the sun and it's a special place. I've only been a few times, but it's just so absolutely stunning. Or the Puget Sound, which is my second favorite place. The whole rainforest is pretty stunning if we go away from if we stay a little bit closer to home. But then, I think there's so many places. I love deserts. I love deserts is incredible because it shows what nature is possible to do in it's like around it's just stunning. Yeah.
Oh, well, Annette, just thank you for what you do. I think the whole planet may not realize the impact that you are having and will continue to have, but thank you. And I know the bees are saying thank you too, for sure. And I just think that, yeah, what you're doing is truly incredible. It's groundbreaking. It's innovative. And I think when you start to take the sustainability problem or anything related to climate, you're kind of on the other side of like where everyone's going one way, you go the other, but that other way has just like this profound impact that it's huge. So thank you. And thank you for just taking the time. Like, one, incredible conversation, but two, like, I've always been a fan of honeybees, but knowing now even more, I'm just huge fans. Like, just want to cheer for them the whole way.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Thank you so much for listening to the Goat Podcast. You are the reason why we exist and why we show up every single day.
You know, I've spent too many years being against stuff, and I've found now that it's a little bit easier and a little bit more fun to be for something.
How are we going to power the world? How are we going to build the world? How are we going to feed the world?
Company isn't just good or bad, black or white. Usually there's a lot more there, a lot more that I don't know.
It's actually about what you do in your daily life every day can make a huge difference.
Give this episode a share, join our goat community, but most importantly, go spend some time in nature because you might find it a meaningful reminder of the amazing place that we get to call home. I'm Steve Cassingham, and we'll see you next time.